Welcome to all of our different panelists. I would love for each of you to please come on, unmute, and introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about what you're working on.
All right, let me start then. Hi, everyone. I'm Raul. I work at Bumble as a design system and platform engineer. I've been an engineer for more than 14 years at this moment, so I've been seeing quite a lot of stuff in this industry. And at the moment, I'm leading the whole design system rewrite when it comes to iOS at Bumble, so it's quite a big project, and we are very excited to be partnership with Figma on this matter.
Awesome. Lucas?
Hey, my name is Lucas. I'm a staff systems designer at GitHub working on Primer, our design system. I mainly focus on design tokens, color accessibility, and of course our Figma libraries, specifically for product and the whole tooling that comes with that and is around that, including the development handoff, of course. Previously to that, I have been working at other companies, mostly in Germany, because I'm from Berlin, Germany, like Telekom, RTL, Daimler, and such, and always on design systems, which is how I got to actually experience the change in design systems and in the tooling and the space of design systems, which is very interesting.
My name is Jolson. I work at HP for the past 20 years, but I am in the industry for 28 years. I've worked from IT support to being full stack developer, front-end developer, designer, product designer, and right now I'm in the strategist on our design system, kind of trying to glue everything together that I've learned throughout all these years to create this design system for HP and support our products. So that's my main role here. Thank you all.
Thank you. So kicking off our discussion, the first thing I would love to talk about is, what are some changes that your teams have experienced when it just comes to managing your design system and ensuring that there's code consistency? And I know adoption has also been a really big issue. So to kick us off, Raul, maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I think one of the most challenging things and when it comes to keeping consistency is where your source of truth is, right? Because there's this thing that where designers are always going to build the documentation in a way, and it comes to engineering, and the documentation it might rely on a different thing, a different source. So when it comes to the point which components are implemented, how you track version of components, or these components actually custom or not, it becomes a problem. We have these common problems. I think that the industry where an engineer might just land on a feature, they're gonna check a component, and if they don't know where this component is, they're just gonna create custom implementations. So if we keep repeating this pattern and over again, your code base starts to increase and becomes very problematic because you cannot keep anymore. So if you go to a massive, let's say they want to do some rebrand or you want to revamp your design system, how do you do that, right? It becomes a massive problem. So, and when you don't know where your components are because your source of truth is, unknown, how do you do adoption of components? You don't know which components are there. You don't know are those informations are linked to each other. And I think that's most what this all event is about, right? Trying to bring the source of truth to a very familiar environment that engineers and designers already know, right? Because we keep switching from environment to, documentations can rely in different places. Code bases are completely different in very different places. So what we are trying to do is always trying to connect those informations. And I think that's what is going to make the difference.
Lucas, anything else to add on that? Are you experiencing anything similar or?
Yeah, I think so. So since I'm coming more from the, I guess, design side of things, a big issue that we are having, or we used to have, is the difference in naming of components, properties, and all such. On the one side, because I think designers and developers speak a little bit of a different language. Let's say in Figma, there's a common pattern of using emojis, for example, in property names, and you wouldn't really see that in code so much. We have been trying to align this. We even wrote a plugin to make sure that it checks our Figma to tell us where the names are different. But sometimes this doesn't help because there are also different concepts in those platforms. So in Figma, for example, you have Boolean properties where you toggle icons. Let's say an icon, right? You'd have a property that toggles the icon and another one that changes the icon. Whereas in React code, you just have an icon property. And if you put an icon inside, it toggles it and changes it, right? So there is a mismatch that cannot really be solved in the different platforms. And this is something that we have been struggling with and try to find kind of like logics and common patterns to address this. And then on the adoption side of things, what I see a lot is that we have a lot of folks who actually work on screenshots, right? They don't go into Figma because the use of going into Figma was fairly limited for them. So they just work with screenshots where they don't get any tokens, that don't really know which component it is. And especially if sometimes you have components that are relatively similar in visual design, they may just take the wrong component and style it a little bit different. And it depends on the company, of course, but at GitHub, a lot of people write code, and sometimes there may be a person who is more of a, let's say, backend developer who writes front-end code. And then it is really problematic if you don't understand the space and just have a screenshot. So I think for this, a tool like Code Connect is going to be huge, because you actually get the right code, and now you have a lot more value in going into the code, into Figma tool. Sorry.
And Jilson, anything you want to add here?
So I think Lucas and Raul touched a very good point, where it's this language that designers and developers talk. They talk different language. And I think one of the most challenges that we faced while building a design system that can be used is that we need to close that gap, right? And we need to make them talk the same language. So you kind of have to create this third language where they can talk that, and then everyone will understand each other. So things that was raised here, like easy to understand documentation for both sides, how you do parity in terms of name properties. And don't get me wrong, that was a huge, big deal also on our end, but we kind of felt that we can reach that middle ground by keeping things consistent, help developers get it, right? In terms of how they can understand what the designers want, by providing them, here's how you implement what the designer is designing. So that parity between design or Figma libraries and code, it's paramount for that. And we always iterate to it, like keeping working together with people. Feedback, it's always super important. And yeah, the challenges are overcome when you try to talk the same language.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like that's definitely an overarching theme, just around how like designers and developers, they have kind of different sources of truth, as mentioned, and just also, especially with even like naming things, I think one of the long running jokes for design systems is that 80% of the work is just figuring out how to name stuff. Curious to know, Lucas, you mentioned how you guys built some different plugins. Has anyone else tried to implement any kind of like custom solution, or are there just any processes that you all have put into place to just try to kind of make sure that there's some alignment between design and development?
Yeah, we invested hardly on documentation on a internal website where we have documentation about the anatomy of the component, and then we have an interactive demo where people can play around with that anatomy, and then that kind of translate into a code snippet down below. So it's kind of the same thing that you guys see on Code Connect today, but it's in the website, and then you can edit those things live, play around with that sandbox. And that helped a lot, because a lot of designers use that to kind of see the button in action instead of just a static version on Figma, right? And also, when there is a discussion with developers and designers, they go to that sandbox and they test things together there. So designers can show what they need on that sandbox, and developers can edit live and maybe exercise one property here and there and make that bridge. So we use that a lot.
Anything you all want to add, Raul or Lucas?
Yeah, I feel like naming is hard. I think regardless if you're a designer or engineer, it's always gonna be like something that we always gonna face problems. And even when you're designing your components and checking the whole structure, it is a problem. Like how you do, you map that to the code, as mentioned by by others. Every platform has their conventions that we should be following. At Bumble, we had a whole system, but for this, to tokens, for instance, which we run a lot of automations and a lot of in-house tools that we use as well. But names is also something that you always have to use, be creative and at the same time respect to not have any conflict with components already created.
Well, now that we've talked about some of the issues that teams experience, and Lucas, you mentioned that, from some of the problems you guys were experiencing, there was excitement when you first heard about Code Connect. And I just love to hear more about, what has your team's experience been like so far? Any learnings or just best practices that you guys have established as you've become more familiar with it?
The thing is, I was very excited about this, as you mentioned, because this promise of having like a pre-configured copy pastable kind of preview sounded really good, and that is actually what it is. What I also can actually really support is what was mentioned beforehand in the previous talk, that it is really important to kind of to put the Figma definitions for the component with the code. So this is something that we went for. We looked at both the storybook possibilities for Code Connect, as well as having a dedicated file, a TypeScript file for this, and then in the end decided that we will go for the TypeScript file because co-locating, that's what I was looking for, is a pattern that we do with a lot of other tooling like CSS and testing and stuff like this. So it's really cool that Code Connect now fits into this kind of structure. And this has definitely been quite helpful also because we can version it with our components, and we can integrate this into CI tooling so that we actually can maybe even find issues before you see them in Figma when you adjust the component, let's say. And with this component being in the folder of the component itself, you of course kind of notice more as a developer that this is maybe a file you have to take a look at if you change something. And this, I think, is really, really cool for us. Yeah.
I imagine this is probably a lot easier too for just developers instead of looking at screenshots as well.
Definitely. And what I also really like, and what I was in the beginning a little worried about, but then when I heard that you can basically manually write those files, to me that sounded really cool, because I know that our components are fairly close to how Figma is built, but it doesn't always match up because you can't have this. And with this kind of manually writing those files, it doesn't matter what component you have and how you build it, you can always get the exact preview that you need. Because I feel if the preview is only a little bit wrong, then it kind of like falls into pieces again and you can't really use it. And this way, you can copy the component. You don't really have to know React if you just do a PR on something and just want to add a component into an existing project. This is extremely easy. It's copy and paste and you are done. So this has been something that definitely worked really, really well for us.
Jilson, would love to hear how your team has been using Code Connect, and if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I think what really is out on our end is that the developer doesn't have to change in context. Before that, they had to go to our website to take a look. Of course, if they were not experienced, there's like a learning curve, but either way, now they don't have to switch that context anymore, right? And then it's not only about just copying the code. I think you can add much more functionality to it. As you guys seeing in the demonstration, you can require a few things in there. Like, for example, if you need to put an accessibility property there, you can force them to fill out that thing. So all that things help a lot in the development end to not forget things that it's important during the development phase, and it's up to the developer to decide how they want to tackle things. Like you probably have a checklist of how to make a website accessible or that implementation, and then you can rely a little bit on Code Connect to help with some of some of that stuff to kind of remind them which properties need to be filled out, not only the property that is making, for example, that button the way it looks, right? Yeah, there's more to that in a hidden property that's not even available in Figma, but you can force it.
Yeah, I definitely know that. And I mean, this kind of ties back, I think, especially to something I believe, Raul, you said before, just around like source of truth, like it being different for design and development teams. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It's like, it's just this whole, I think the whole Code Connect itself is just about being more efficient in some way, because it's not just efficiency when you're an engineer, but also as a designer, and also bridging the gap between communication between both teams, because it's, yeah, you have your code, the snip code, so allows the engineer just to check at the screen and just copy and paste the code and have the exact representation from what you're expecting. But that's the other part of this, that the designers know exactly what's implemented or not just the engineers. So designers can literally just flag, and now I'm dev mode and see, okay, this component is already implemented, or this component is not implemented yet. So it makes easier for them when they reach out the engineer and say, hey, I'm seeing this feature is like not one-to-one line, or the specification still is not right. And you can see, okay, because components still not exist. So like that's this breach that we always had problems with, like that's no other tool that can feel that. And we are finally having something that can check this. On top of that, I feel like we also speak a lot about like the web tools. And I think for the first time, it's really good to see that we are also heading to native, like, big companies still use native solutions like Swift and Kotlin, and being part of the, this new generation that's also looking to fill this gap, it's just really amazing. And in the future, like being able to switch between like different languages will make like so much simpler the whole thing. And we do expect to be much more efficient in the future.
Yeah, I know translation has been a big issue that a lot of different organizations experience. And I really like your perspective that you shared just around how it can also help designers understand like what components that they're seeing are actually ones that exist in the development side. Something I've heard some organizations struggle with is, especially if you don't have like some kind of solid system for how designers can create new components and make sure that the correct ones are published to libraries. Others just inadvertently use components they've seen someone else use without actually verifying that it truly is a part of the design system. So yeah, I think that's like a really interesting point here. Any other best practices, learnings around implementation advice that you all could share with people who are looking to try Code Connect for the first time?
I think the goal is to start small. And we were discussing in the chat about like internal documentation of the design system. And I think Code Connect to me, it's a first step for something bigger that we probably are going to discuss in the next question, but it's a step up, right? It's always an improvement. And if you look at the demos, it's not that easy to implement nice things. Like, let's say you have a design system with like a lot of components. Some of them are very complex to be on Code Connect. Some others, it's easier. But even if you just implement the easiest ones, the most used ones, it's a win-win already. So start small, and then that helps on the go, right? Because sometimes the ramp up for people that are developing something, they need to read documentation or go to our website, read all the properties, what they mean, and all that technical part. It's a Boolean, it's a enumeration, whatever. And then with that kind of stuff, you take that complexity out of that, and then you also avoid the try error. Like if they're trying to mimic what's on the Figma, sometimes they try error some properties to make that happen. And then with Code Connect, it's you're basically cutting out that part and go straight to the code. Even if you don't still understand yet how some properties work, you get the right value to be set it. So I think down the road, you can learn, but it's still, it put you in a better perspective in terms of development.
And I think one tip that I would have, because it tripped me up in the beginning, is the way Code Connect works is that part of your file is not even though it looks like code, it's not rendered, it's actually just parsed. And I think the documentation is going to talk about it, but because of this, read the documentation, because you do have to wrap your head around this one time to understand how it works. It all makes sense then, but if you don't read it, it might lead to unexpected results in between. So that's definitely something to keep in mind.
If I could give a piece of advice on top of what Jason says, like that, start small, yeah, but do not start with a button, because the button is a very complex element. If you have across so many features, I would say like start with like much more smaller components, like a tool and those kind of things, so you can understand how you map those. Because even though the CLI can do the scaffolding initially, understanding how you map the properties and how you can customize things will be a time saver for you in the future. Like, I think that's the best way. And if you want to convince your business that you should upgrade and offer seats, that's the best way to go. Trying to measure as well how much time you spend switching context. You know, you go from one screen to another screen, or how much time you spend trying to look, trying to find components in your library. Like, that's the best way to, not just to start, but also to make sure that the business understands the value of what you're trying to bring to the company.
Yeah, that's really great advice, especially for, I think, if any organizations haven't tried using dev mode yet, definitely being able to test and see how much time is truly saved. Are the features that are out there, do they really help support your organization's unique problems and use cases? Yeah, I think that's a super great point. Yeah, as Jilson mentioned, we're talking a little bit too, just around like the future of design systems. So with Code Connect, but even just with other tools that all of you have been seeing out there, I'd be curious to hear your perspective on what do you think is like the future of design and development collaboration and design systems? Maybe Jilson, we can start with you since you're kind of alluding to that.
Yeah. So when this came out, it was just an ignite on more things that you can do within Figma, right? We're talking about just a specific feature, which is Code Connect, but with dev mode, you can write plugins specifically for dev mode. And then you might be able to go further with AI, for example, right? That's why I said this is, to me, is the very first step of something bigger, where you can generate more code and more connected with your design system, right? Right now, it's just components, but in the future, I'm expecting that the whole layout, based on auto layout, based on all the properties that you set already on design, you can spill out a much more complete code that can be just wired up by developers later on in the process, so they can focus more their efforts on the business logic, on things that really matters for the product, right? And while the design system will take out of the plate other things that shouldn't be their worriness, like, for example, space between elements and all that kind of stuff that it's beyond Code Connect right now, but I feel that we are going towards down that path. And also, to me, it's a way for the designers to learn a little bit more about how the dev world works, right? Sometimes the designers have this willing to go and just try to implement what they designed, and having a tool like Code Connect help them to do that. Like, if they need to do a prototype that is a little bit more complex than just using the Figma prototype, they can now have that bind it to the design system and learn from that. So I think that kind of open up a lot of possibilities for the future. And I'm really, really happy to see what Figma will do next, because I know you guys are working on great stuff. I know you guys, for example, last year acquired a Diagram, which has a lot of AI tools, and I really would like to see how that kind of thing will integrate with Code Connect.
Awesome. So maybe coming back a little bit to the maybe closer future, hopefully, is I think this will help and this tooling in general will help in making the handoff between design and development maybe nearly frictionless. That's at least my hope. Maybe they can be something like, you have Figma for VS Code already, so maybe I can start like dragging the components over from the design to the code side, and developers don't even have to go into Figma anymore and have this code switch. Those things I think are extremely interesting, even though they don't seem so big, but I think they will pay out a lot on the day-to-day workflow. And this is what will amount to a lot of time saved in the end. I also think something that is very interesting, because we now have this kind of layer between design and code that we can programmatically design, basically, right? With Code Connect, we can actually move the design and the code a little bit further apart again. So in Figma, we can concentrate on creating the best UX for the designers working in Figma with design libraries. And in the code side, we have the best developer experience, and we still get a perfect match. And I think this is something that we have now already, that we can start working on today, basically, and making it so that working with both sides of a design system is just really awesome for the people who actually do it. And that, I think, is extremely valuable, and can also help with adoption and reducing the amount of like help you need to give people, because it just works better.
I'm hearing a little bit of a conflict of opinions. Sounds like Jilson's thinking it's going to bring design development almost like blurring the lines a little bit more around how they're going to approach building. And then Lucas, you seem to think that it's going to allow these two areas to be more focused on their specific specialty. Raul, do you have a perspective on which way it's going to go, or do you think it's going to be totally different?
So like I think my opinion might be between both of them, because we are in a new era, as Jason said, like about AI, right? So we are starting to map our design system with Code Connect to Figma. So Figma is becoming the source of truth. So what's actually stopping us to create complex organisms or complex flows with just one tap of a button? If you already know all the components that I have on my design system, we know that you can read some information from the Figma API. You can know the animations, the prototype, how you design the flow. So actually, what is stopping us to just become more actually business engineers, engineers that are much more focused on the business logic, while the whole tool can take care of like what you're doing, the whole visual stuff. I think that the future that we're gonna see is you have complex flows, you already have all your components designed, you just download the project and you can just test by yourself without requiring an engineer to go there and do something for you. You as a designer will be actually able to test exactly what you're doing with actual real code. And I think we are very much towards that. And not just web, I think like somehow we're gonna achieve that with native. It's a little bit more complex, but we will do it at some point. So I think I said like between them, like with two different opinions, but I think like we are heading to always the same place.
I think time will only tell, but it was really great to hear all of your different perspectives. And thank you all so much, Raul, Lucas, and Jilson, for sharing your perspectives and also some best practices and advice for people who are looking to use Code Connect. So thank you so much.